Hello and welcome. It is standard Super League time. I'm Randy Bueller, joined by Luis Vargas. How you doing, Luis?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm excited to see these decks play. People brought some nice decks this week.
I agree. I'm excited to see the decks played. I'm excited to see this slate of players do battle. It's going to be a fun night.
Yeah, and you know the thing that I love, and this is true both in vintage and standard super leagues, is that you have a mix of people playing these like great tier one decks and people playing a little bit more of a brew. And I think that mix is really important because I think if it was all brews, people would, it would be less applicable to what you're going to play like in your own like Friday Night Magic or PTQ or what have you. But if it was all tier one decks, it's like, well, that's not, anything super new and exciting. And this is a good combination of those. Plus, all these guys do want to win. Every single person in this joined with a deck they think is capable of winning.
Totally agree. Now, before we get talking about the decks that these guys actually brought, give us your take on Standard right now. We've had a bunch of tournaments. Obviously, there were a bunch of regional PTQs over the weekend. Where do you see Standard sort of headed into tonight?
Well, I think Esper Dragons is still going to be the deck to beat in Standard in general. If I were playing in a tournament, I would expect to play against a couple Esper Dragons decks at the very least, and certainly have a plan for it. Though my plan would probably be to beat the Mirror, because that's the deck that I would play if I were playing in it.
Sure.
I actually prepared a decent amount for the regional PTQ in terms of like trying to figure out a good deck list, and a lot of my friends ended up playing Esper Dragons, so I was hopefully able to help some amount of them. But it's not the
Paul
only
qualified,
deck.
right? That had to be mission accomplished on the weekend.
Certainly, Paul qualified, MJ qualified, Michael Jacob, and
Right?
actually Lanho's brother also qualified in
Oh, I
Texas.
didn't know about that one.
Yeah, because him and Lan and Chris Pakula all played Esper Dragons as well, and so it was pretty cool. I mean, I think the deck is very good. I think that there's a lot of other good options, though. Certainly, Mono Red has some game against it. You can also really warp your decks to try to beat it. The question is how much do you want to do that? In a league like this, going back to this league,
Yeah.
I don't think you want to do that. I don't think you can assume that there's going to be more than one or two people on Esper in any given week.
Okay. So, I mean, what are you expecting out of these guys? I guess you've seen the deck list, so it's a little hard to ask you, but go back 24 hours, right? What were you expecting these guys to do, given your take on Standard?
Well, it's interesting because there was some expectation from each of the players too of, well, Kuno is going to play a kind of like a blue-white control deck, or Tom Ross is going to play heroic or mono red, or Paul Cheon's going to play Esper, Kibler's going to play green-white aggro.
Yep.
And the players to some degree lived up to those expectations. It's not all like everyone like played something completely different, but some also didn't, and some in notable ways. So I think that some of the people are going to be surprised by what their opponent brought, because they did end up on a deck that's contrary to what everyone expected. On the other hand, some of the people are playing kind of what you would think they would, at least to kick off the league. Though the fact that you get to change week to week means that we're going to see a lot of deck variations here.
Now, how would you handle it? Would you be just running Esper Dragons because it's too sweet to not run? Or do you try to play against stereotypes?
It's tough because I don't know who my opponent would be. So that does, of course, change my evaluation. But yeah, I mean, I do like playing that deck. I also really like playing the Just Guy Tokens deck. I don't think it would have been a huge surprise if I played that, for example. But I think that each player kind of has to decide how much they want to play the deck that they like playing the most, and how much they want to play into their opponent, assuming that. Since, yeah, if you're playing against Kibler and you think he's going to play like a green-based aggro deck, like if you're Kibler, you know that. So you have to make your decision with that in mind.
Yeah, Kibler seems like the guy who's most likely to stay to type. He's going to have Deathmiss Raptors and Den Protectors in his deck. He's going to be beating down the green deck, right?
There's a good chance of that.
Certainly what I thought going in. I think that these guys are not. So the way deck lists are going to work, just so you guys know out there on the stream, we're actually going to publish the deck lists at 6 o'clock. So you're going to be able to see exactly what these guys are playing. You're going to be able to watch them with full knowledge of the deck lists. Now, the players are not allowed to watch the stream. They're not allowed to look at the deck list page until after round 1. So the players will not know what they're up against in round 1. We will know what they're up against. And the players, I mean, we're not going to say, hey, you must like sit quietly in the corner after they've won their round 1 game. So once they finish round 1, it's fair game. They can watch the stream. I mean, assuming they're not playing, because obviously they can't look at their hand. But they're allowed to watch the stream. They're allowed to look at the deck list after they finish their first round match. So that is the setup. The deck lists are scheduled to be posted to the Wizards webpage. They should just go live in 11 minutes automatically. It's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, and people are going to get to see after round 1 exactly what they're up against, which actually is the same as Vintage Super League, because in the Vintage Super League, we only do 1 match a week, which means after your first match, you then know what your next round opponent's going to be playing against. Less time to test, but I don't know how many people in the VSL actually test anyway. I know I've never like tested a matchup before I played it, though some people have, and it's not a bad thing to do. If you want to spend your time doing it, you certainly can.
Yeah, I tested a couple matches usually. Yeah. Not a lot, but I would usually try to get a match or 2 in. Not a whole lot of other, for me, not a lot of other competitive Magic I'm allowed to play. So
yeah, understandable. So,
go ahead.
I was going to say that it's interesting too that how people approach beating the Esper deck, because there is, you know, it is public enemy number 1. Like if you're building your deck with that deck in mind, you have to like kind of decide where do you want to land against other decks too. Like you mentioned Death Mist Raptor. Death Mist Raptor Den Protector is a good way to beat Esper. That is effective. But if you go too far down that path, you're weak to something like, you know, the Green Devotion deck, for example. They don't care about your 3/3 death touches all that much. So it's pretty interesting to see, especially in a field like this where you have an expectation of seeing a lot of different archetypes, how much you can really be targeted.
All right. Well, I don't know if we can get the bracket up on the screen right now, but I think we should talk about the actual matchups and what we're actually going to be looking at. Awesome. So top of the bracket, Jerry Thompson against Josh Utter-Leyton. We know at this point that Jerry has a Sidisi Whip deck, a lot of super interesting one-ofs in his take on that archetype, and Josh has, I guess, Esper Mentor. Do you have a name or a story behind this deck? It looks pretty sweet.
Well, the first time I saw that deck was when Josh emailed it in, so I don't know anything about it besides the fact that he put it together. I mean, it's playing a lot of the cards I like. I like Mentors and I like Treasure Cruises. It's kind of what it's actually doing is playing like a Jeskai Tokens deck, but you took out Jeskai Ascendancy and you put in Esper control cards. Is essentially what it looks like.
I'll totally buy that.
Yeah, Monastery Mentor, Duress, Thoughtseize, Anticipate, Counterspells, and then Elspeth and Treasure Cruise. And Ojutai's Command is also a big one. It's a combo with the Soulfire Grandmaster, which he's got 4 of. He can go off with Soulfire Grandmaster Thoughtseize.
Yeah, no, the deck, I think that's right. It's Esper Control, but with a Mentor. It feels like, does it just come under the Esper Dragons deck then? It's got a lot of the same control cards, but the offense is a lot more effective?
Yeah, the idea is just maybe going under removal. Its threats are a little cheaper, so it can play a lot of cheap. Like Thoughtseize plus a cheap threat is more effective than Thoughtseize plus an expensive one.
Makes sense.
So we're clear that the players are not supposed to be watching the stream right now, right?
Oh yeah. They're not supposed to be watching. They're not allowed to watch. They're not allowed to hang out and chat. Not until after round 1. That is what we've agreed to. That is the plan. Second match down the list. Brian Kibler against Brad Nelson. I was actually hoping that... So one of the things we're hoping to experiment with as the Standard Super League goes for a while is actually having multiple streams going for the first round. I know that Brian was he's been kind of sick today. I don't know if you accused him of setting up an excuse by sort of posting us illness updates to Twitter over the course of the day. Brian was actually initially planning to stream that match, and
right.
I do think that's something that would be cool as we go on, since we can't watch all the first round matches at the same time. You know, if Brian wants to stream his perspective on his match, or Paul wants to stream his perspective on his match, that is something that the players, I think once they get comfortable with Standard Super League, you may see a couple of them start to experiment with that. We will not have the 2-box coverage of Kibler versus Nelson, which is a little bit too bad. But the matchup there, Kibler has in fact shown up with Death Mist and Den Protector. And it's funny, I ran into him at the Pro Tour, and he played Green-White at the Pro Tour. And basically what he said to me was that he had every color of Death Mist Raptor Den Protector deck built. It was like, okay, green X, okay, if X is white, I get Fleecemane Lion. If X is black, I get Rakshasa Death Dealer. And it was just, what do I get for blue? What do I get? How the different ways I can do this. And so he chose green-white, thinking fleece mains. But I mean, really seemed like I wish he'd played the green-black version of it, which is in fact what he's running here. So we're kind of seeing the deck that Kibler kind of, I think in retrospect, wishes he had played at the Pro Tour.
Yeah, and it's pretty close which color you want to pair these colors with, especially since white actually has a lot of legitimate removal spells these days with Dromoka's Command and Valorous Stance. But in this case, just getting the black removal spells is a pretty big deal, and that's I think why Kibler decided to go this way. Getting Hero's Downfall and Thoughtseize are both just very effective cards at making sure that your opponent can't get anything going. And Thoughtseize Denprec is also a nice combo. It's just a cheap spell that goes to your graveyard that's effective.
Oh yeah. Now, his opponent, Brad Nelson, I mean, just look, clearly one of the best Standard players in the game. Everybody always wants to know what Brad's up to in Standard. And he's running Bant Heroic this week. He's basically running the list that won the SCG Open over the weekend in Ross Merriam's hands.
Yeah, it's the same blue-white heroic deck we've seen for a couple months, but Dromoka's Command is just a huge reason to go green, and that's the only green card in the main deck actually is the command, and then it doesn't even really have any sideboard that is green. It's just basically just adding green for that one card, but that is a very strong card.
Yeah, and that's essentially Tom Ross is the first guy I saw doing that Dromoka's Command out of the heroic. I mean, he's played a lot of heroic, and it almost feels like Brad and Tom just swapped decks this week. Because Tom's on a Jeskai Tokens deck that looks like something we've seen Brad play in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, Tom knew that Paul, Cheon, his opponent, was going to predict that Tom was either on Mono Red or Heroic as the most likely. I don't think Paul was like all in on that. Sure. But playing Jeskai Tokens does avoid some of those drawbacks. Like, Jeskai Tokens doesn't care about one-for-one removal really at all. Like, Hero's Downfall is not a huge deal. And even, in my experience, against sweepers like Drown in Sorrow, you can board pretty well to nullify those cards.
So Tom, believing Paul would put him on Heroic, kind of zigs. Definitely zigs away from the Stereotype deck. But Paul, I think, is on his Stereotype deck. He's on the Esper Dragons list that I think everybody expected him to be on.
Yeah, Paul just level 1'd it. He's like, well, people think I'm going to play Esper, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to play Esper. I mean, on the other side, Paul is playing the deck that I think is the best deck in Standard. So even if your opponent knows about it, I mean, there's a reason Esper's the best. People built all their decks to beat Esper and still just don't beat Esper. So it'll be interesting to see if that can just hold out.
That totally makes sense. And it is the only copy of the Esper Dragons deck we have amongst our 8 decks. The only one.
Well, it is awesome that we have 8 different archetypes, and it is funny that the best deck in Standard is only represented by 1. I think people maybe didn't want to play a deck that was expected, and maybe people just wanted to try something else.
Yeah, well, 8 different archetypes, and I mean, I think Kuno is the one who has sort of the most interesting deck choice in my mind. It's the one we've been kind of building up to. Our feature, the match we're going to start on, is going to be the match between Owen Turnwald and Andrew Kuno. Those guys are, both ranked players. They're both awesome players. They're teammates actually on Team Pantheon, so they've done a lot of. And I mean, Andrew Kuno is definitely a guy that has a reputation.
Yeah, Hello?
Yeah,
All right. Looks like... But, we'll see if he gets back here in a second. Well, looking at our first match here, our first feature match, we have Randy against, Andrew Kuno against Owen Turnwald, and I think Owen assumed that Kuno would be on a blue-white control deck because that's the most common assumption. Kuno's played that in pretty much every turn. Year and a half, as well as many years before that. So Owen's playing a deck that has 4 Thoughtseize in the main deck, 4 Duress in the sideboard, 4 Self-Inflicted Wound in the sideboard to kill Ojutai. And Kuno's playing Rug Ramp. He's playing like a Sarkhan Ramp deck, which is definitely not what anyone would expect. Though when I talked to William Jensen about it, quite get there for the Pro Tour, but I'm pretty excited to see how this goes. And we're going to get the matches going relatively soon here. All right, matches are getting set up, so we're actually going to go down to the matches pretty soon here, hopefully with Randy, but we'll see if he makes it back.
I think I'm back. Hopefully I'm back. Awesome. Sounds like I'm probably back.
Good.
The Kuno deck choice here is insane to me. I mean, it's really the best example of sort of the second level, right? Owen put Andrew on a deck, played, I think, a very good deck, but a deck that is both, I think, chosen in part because it matches up so well against the controlled decks, like the blue-white deck that Andrew's been playing. And Andrew is just playing the anti-Andrew deck.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a guarantee that Rug Ramp is like going to be insane against Owen's deck. It's just because Thoughtseize is still a good card against it. But it is he's definitely trying to avoid, a card like Duress, for example, is just not that good against Kuno. I would not expect Owen to bring it in.
I keep been waiting for that guy to show up. Sarkhan seems like such an amazing card. And there just hasn't really been a deck for him to fit into, right?
Yeah, it's certainly a very powerful card. One of the drawbacks to Sarkhan is if your opponent already has a creature out, they can a ton of decent blockers, which is what Kuno has done. It definitely goes a long way. If you have Courser out in order to block, then even if they kill your dragon, your Courser can still block their 3/3 or whatnot. But yeah, we see Owen here on Obs on aggro, which curious to see what he ends up playing in Toronto this weekend. Since that's the other thing, is these guys are kind of all practicing for Toronto.
No, that's a great point.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Because honestly, at a Grand Prix, you don't really worry about spoiling your tech all that much, just because it's a Grand Prix, there's 2,000 players in it. Standard Super League.
Yeah, I wonder actually how much in getting to be next on their radar, I would think. You're not going to Toronto?
I'm not going to Toronto now.
But yeah, both of these guys are.
If I were going to Toronto, I would likely still to be the most targeted deck. I still think Esper is just really good, and I'm pretty happy playing Esper mirrors. I just played a lot of the mirrors, and I kind of enjoy it. So I don't mind when the best deck's a deck. I don't mind playing the mirror of. It's going to be hard pressed for me not to play it.
Yeah, that mirror is definitely, I think, certainly a lot of players who I think actively enjoy it, both of us included, and Andrew.
Yeah, I don't think Andrew's ever shied away from playing a control mirror.
Now, do you have a take on the blue-white control deck that he's been playing in Standard? I mean, the deck he played at the Pro Tour was not the Esper Dragons deck, but it was a control deck. He basically seems to favor Elspeth as the key card to make control work in the Standard, and didn't really have any black mana in his deck.
I don't think that deck's good. Blue-white has traditionally not been favored against blue-black just because the card Thoughtseize and other black spells like that, Duress as well, are both so good against in the control matchups that there's no, I think, incentive to play a blue-white deck when a blue-black deck is like the most played deck in Standard.
Yeah, I'm not sure that going to the Pro Tour, they probably didn't expect blue-black to be the most played deck. They obviously didn't have a blue-black control deck they thought was particularly good.
Agreed.
But at this point, you think, don't go blue-white.